and gentlemen, we're going to call to order our first hearing of the evening. This is the application of Tom and Kara Crowley. The application is dated October 17, 2013, and it's on file with the Board of Appeals seeking a variance from the terms of Section 6A1 of the zoning bylaw. The Crowleys seek to be allowed to build a 12-foot by 28-foot shed dormer to the rear of the existing single-family dwelling at 101 Old Farm Road in Milton. The property is located in a residential C district. Section 5A1 requires that new buildings and portions of new buildings be limited to 2.5 stories in any residential district. And the section further requires that the basement is counted as a story if the finished first floor is located more than 4 feet above average grade. And here, the first floor is 4 feet 9 inches above the existing grade, making the proposed addition a third story, so they're seeking relief under the bylaw. My name is John Leonard. I'm the chairman of the board. I'll be acting as chairman for this particular hearing. With me this evening, to my immediate left, is board member Jeffrey Mullen, and to my right is board member Ted Daber. The rules of the board are such that we'll first hear from the applicant, then we'll hear from persons present who either have questions of the applicant or wish to speak in support of this application. And then we'll hear from any person present who has questions or wants to speak in opposition to this application for variance. We're tape recording the proceeding this evening as always, so that we'd ask that before anyone speaks, tell us your name and address, speak up nice and clear and loud so we'll have an accurate hearing if we have to revert to the tape in order to prepare a decision. I've summarized the legal advertisement which we published. In addition to the legal ad, we have the application, which is dated 10/17/2013, so we'll have that document as evidence at the particular hearing. We have a denial letter from Joseph Prondak, our building inspector, dated 10/1/2013, and the applicants have submitted a plot plan of the subject property prepared by Donald G. Rosa. It's dated 9/20/2013, and it shows the subject property and the proposed addition and the different distances from the various lot lines. In addition to that, the applicant has filed with us a series of sketch plans. They're dated June 29th, 2013. Plans A002, A004, and some other sketch plans that are not computerized. They look like they're actually hand-drawn. The dated June 29th, 2013, A006. So we thank the applicant for these plans. And is the applicant present this evening? Good.
Mind if we all come up?
Oh, sure. Why don't you introduce yourself just for
My
a
name is
second?
Paul Hogan. I'm an attorney representing the applicant. I live at 56 Pierce Street. My office is at 374 Granite Ave, East Milton. And I'm accompanied by the applicant, Kara Crowley, and she could speak for
Hi,
herself.
how are you?
Good, welcome to the board.
Thank you. Nice to meet
We
you.
brought the contractor.
Oh, the contractor.
Steve Murphy.
Okay, that's great. Mr. Hogan, welcome to the board. I think
Thank you.
this may be your first
My
appearance.
inaugural run, yes.
Inaugural run. Well,
Yes.
this is great. It's always good to see a new face
Sure.
appearing before the board. Why don't you tell us about the application and why the board should grant the requested relief?
Yes, you referred to the 10/1/13 denial letter. This is 101 Old Farm Road in Indian Cliffs, and the property lies in a residence C zone, which requires, as you stated, that the floor is, the finished first floor is located more than 4 inches above grade. There is a plan that you have from Mr. Rosa, and it shows that we're only 9 inches above that. And it really, it's a topographical issue with the property, how the land slopes is really what the condition of the hardship is. The Crowleys would like to put this shed dormer on their home, and you have the plan. It lies below the top ceiling. I have a photograph, and Mr. Murphy has put his artistic rendition of what the dormer might look like.
Okay.
But might be helpful. It's going to be below the highest point in the home, it's gonna be in the rear. And Mrs. Crowley has contacted all the abutters in the area, about 20 homes, she tells me, that she's spoken to, and she has not received anyone who's opposed to it. Basically, it's a hardship because of the topographical condition of the property, and the benefit of getting this approved would be that they would be able to use the home to their liking, be able to stay there. They have 4 children. They like to use the area for study for their oldest son, and it'll allow them to be able to do that. It's a split-level home, and the construction is designed to kind of improve the living space, so it's more usable to them. I think that Mr. Murphy, if he has anything to add, is going to be doing the construction. He's a reputable contractor. You have the plans in front of you. We also have Mr. McKinnon. McKinnon Associates has done calculations to get ready for the project. And I think in a nutshell, that's it. If there's any questions, anything that you want to add, Kara, to the board?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, let me just ask you a couple of questions. Number one, is it fair to say that if you get your variance, it's going to be, the house is going to be constructed in substantial conformity with the plans that you've submitted to the board?
Yes, that's correct.
And that the photographic reflection of the proposed addition is similar to that which you're going to build?
Yes, that's correct.
And you're not going to come in with new plans or
No,
new elevations or new roofs or new windows or new doors or anything
no,
else?
that's exactly it.
Because people have done that to us in the past, and it creates consternation.
With that drawing, the reason I did it, and I kind of did it quick, so that she could show her neighbors and they could kind of see what we're doing. And that's why that's kind of a quick version of it.
Sure, and just in terms of the technical elements of it, can you tell us the slope differential from, as you're looking at the residence, perhaps from the left-hand side to the right-hand side? What's the
Well, on the
distance
left-hand
from the
side, it's approximately about a 9 to 11 slope. When we put the new slope on, it will be about a 3 to a 4. And that's looking from the driveway facing the side view.
Yes. Okay.
No ridge lines will change. The
And
wall line in the back will stay the same. No bump out or anything like that.
Okay. Mrs. Crowley told us that she's spoken to 20 neighbors, more or less, and there was no opposition to the application for variance. Could it be put more positively that the 20 neighbors actually assented to your variance or were favorable towards it as
Well, I'd
opposed to?
actually like to clarify, I know that the letter did go out to 20 neighbors. I didn't actually speak to all 20.
Okay.
But if you would like me to do that, I would, but I did speak to the abutters on my street.
All of the
and
direct
behind me.
abutters to the property? Okay, and what, were they in favor of the variance application?
Yes, yeah, they all said
All
it's
positive?
fine with them.
Okay, then you talked with other people, perhaps not amounting to 20.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, approximately how many other people did you talk to?
maybe 7 or 8,
Okay, 7 or 8,
yeah,
and were
on
they
my
all
street and around me.
impressed with the improvement as well?
Mhm.
Okay, that's great. So thank you very much. We appreciate that effort. It's always very important to consult with the neighbors. Let's see if my colleagues have any questions regarding this application. Mr. Jeffrey Mullen, please.
Are you going to be able to see the improvement from the street?
You will see the side view of the improvement, but from the street, you barely notice what we do. So.
If you're
it's a-
looking, if you're directly in front of my house looking at it, you will not see it, but if you're coming up Old Farm Road, you will see it, because you can see the side of my house as you're coming up
From the
the
north.
street.
Yeah.
So the people who will be able to see this are your neighbors to the right?
Yes, and I did speak with them.
And who are
and
they?
The Rooneys, Jay and Carolyn Rooney.
And potentially people riding on
Directly
Old
behind
Farm,
me.
but they'd have to really look to see it.
Yes.
They'd have to,
Yes.
My neighbors directly behind me who would have that total back view. I spoke with them as well, and they said fine.
You want to favor us with their names, just for the sake of the
Street are
record?
they on?
They're on Indian Spring Road, and I can get you their names,
that's
but
okay. You
it
know the
escapes
address?
me right now.
Because I've got a big list here.
It might be 104 Indian.
It's 152 feet from the corner of the property line.
How about the Dailies? Does that ring a bell?
What number would they be?
They're
That
at
doesn't ring-
108 Indian Spring, John and Doris Daly, or Richard and Mary Lee Sullivan.
I did not speak with them, no.
Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Mullen, you were saying something.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome, Mr. Mullen. Mr. David, do you have any questions?
I actually don't. All my questions were answered.
Okay, great. So unless you have nothing to add, let's see if there are any interested persons in the audience this evening who wish to either ask questions or state their position on this application. Is there anyone present this evening who wishes to ask questions of the applicant or Mr. Hogan regarding this application, or otherwise wish to speak in support of this variance application? There's a stony silence back there, so it's always a good sign. Let's see, let's ask the more important question. Is there anybody present this evening who wishes to be heard in opposition to this application for variance? And there's no such person present, so if you have nothing to add, Mr. Hogan, what we'll do is we'll close the hearing at the present time, and it's our obligation under the open meeting law to discuss the application in open session and vote on it, and we intend to do that here and now. So, Mr. Mullen, please.
I think it's terrific. I think that it's consistent with the kinds of variances that we've given. In many cases, it's got neighborhood support. It was well presented. It's attractive. It's going to match the existing home, and it's consistent with the neighborhood and the other homes in the neighborhood. So I'm going to vote to support the application.
And Mr. Daba, please.
I agree with everything Mr. Mullins said. I think it'll be an enhancement. And again, it was very well presented. And it also appears that the variance requested is de minimis. And that's also the kind of variance that we generally grant in these circumstances.
Okay, well, I agree with my colleagues. I think Mr. Hogan did a fine job making the presentation. It's always good to have new counsel and new blood before the board. Hope to see you again sometime. This is a quirky section of the bylaw that we run into more often than I think we perhaps should under the circumstances. It's an expensive issue coming to the board, but it's important that you be well represented, and you were. The application is tasteful. We'll put in a few conditions in the application, such as that it'll be constructed in substantial conformity with the sketches and the plans and the like, and that you should commence some activity towards the improvement within 1 year. And Mr. Hogan will tell you, obviously, if for whatever reason, personal, financial, or otherwise, you need to delay this project, you can come in and get a 6-month extension, but you've got to apply for that extension before the variance expires, okay? Otherwise, you'll have to come in and go through this rigmarole again.
Okay.
And Mr. Hogan will also tell you to record your variance with the Registry of Deeds. We have to prepare a written decision. We file it with the town clerk. There's still a 20-day appeal period, even though nobody has spoken in opposition to the application. At the end of 20 days, you can certainly speak with Mr. Prondak, and he'll have your building permit ready to go
Excellent.
if you want to try something in the depths of winter, or if you
Yep.
want to wait to more temperate temperatures, that may be better off, but that's your.
Love a challenge.
So thank you for coming tonight. Thanks for the
Thank you.
Thank you very
presentation.
much.
Thank you.
And good luck on your new addition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll take it.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome, John. Try not to lose the file. At least I didn't sign the one I didn't come to. if you could see that dormer from Whittier Road. I was wondering about that.
I don't think so, but
Might be able to.
maybe a welcome addition to what I look on now.
It's a pretty nice place, pretty nice neighborhood up there, Indian Cliffs.
This,
Some pretty fancy
this
people
is a
live up there.
nice, this is a nice neighborhood. It's, people take care of their homes. Some people
Well, all
up
the
there are
big
very
money.
blessed.
All the big money's up there.
Thank you for volunteering to write the
We'll
decision.
put the Whittier Road,
Nothing else to do,
Whittier
right?
Road provision is going right in here. This is on television, this conversation
That's
you and I
right.
have.
I'm happy to have
Yeah,
every
we're gonna put it in.
conversation on TV. I believe in the open meeting law,
Yeah.
as do all members of this board.
I meant the Whittier Road portion. I think we're gonna put a prohibition that you can't see the shed dormer. Stipulate.
Ted, you're awfully silent, so you've got to help me
He's
out.
laughing.
You can come
He's
to-
laughing.
Come to my defense here.
Big crowd there, Matt.
Sure.
We all set for this one, Ted, you all ready?
Yes.
Bowen, one of-
No, I'm ready.
Mr. Corcoran, are you all set on
I am, thank
this
you.
application? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to call to order our second and final application of the evening. This is a 7:45 hearing at 7:47, so we're doing fairly well this evening. This is the application of Williams Avenue LLC. This application is dated November 6, 2013, on file with the Board of Appeals, and the applicant is seeking special permits and variances from multiple sections of the Milton zoning bylaw. I'm not going to read them off. It'll sound like I'm speaking Chinese, but there are numerous applications here. And in essence, the applicant is seeking to convert an existing building, which is known as the Knights of Columbus Hall, into a 6-unit multifamily residential building, the property being located at 5 to 9 Thatcher Street in Milton, which property is located in a Residence C district. The conversion would consist of an addition to the front of this particular building, an open deck to the front, an addition to the rear of the building, and an open deck to the rear. The front addition and the deck are approximately 3 feet 4 inches from the right side lot line, and the rear addition is shown to be 3.8 feet from the right side lot line, where the particular section involved with that, it's section 61, requires a 10-foot sideline setback. The rear deck is approximately 12 feet from the rear lot line, and the rear addition is shown at 18.5 feet from the rear lot line when the bylaw requires 20 feet from the rear lot line. A special permit is also requested pursuant to Section 3 because the request here is for 6 units. At least that's what the application says. It's a special permit. I'm not quite sure of that. So the applicant has filed with us, I've just summarized the application, an application which is dated November 6, 2013, which we'll have as evidence at this particular hearing. We also have the denial letter somewhere here from Mr. Prondak. Visiting. It's dated 11/5/2013. Thanks, Mr. Mullen. In addition to the application, Mr. Edward Corcoran, attorney for the applicant, has filed an addendum to the application for variances, setting forth various attachments, zoning conversion tables, proposed elevations, and the like, a description of the requested relief, both under the zoning bylaw and under the parking bylaw, as well as a rationale for his requesting the relief. In addition to that, we have a whole series of plans. We certainly have a plot plan by Stephen DeRoche. The plot plan is dated October 21st, 2013, and it shows the existing property being a two-story Knights of Columbus Hall. The plot plan shows where the proposed parking lot is going to be. I don't see the existing residence on the plot plan, but I think it's shown as intended to be demolished. Then we have a series of site plans that the applicant has filed. They're prepared by Gordon Greenfield Associates in Charlestown, Massachusetts. They have different denominations, but the first one certainly is a site layout plan. The second is an east elevation plan showing the proposed improvement on the property. We have another plan being a north elevation front. And then we have a west elevation plan. And then we have a south elevation plan. And also we have some existing section plans, but they're more technical plans. I don't know whether the folks in the audience have had a chance to see these plans. They've been on file for quite a while, but I know it's difficult if you're working during the day to visit the Board of Appeals and come up and take a look at the plans. So I have an extra set. I have an extra set of these plans, so if what I'd like to do is just pass them around and you can take a look at them. And good, and there's an extra set too, so I assume the applicant will take some time in his presentation, so you'll have an opportunity to take a look at those plans. So we have all of these documents as evidence of the proceeding. We also have several letters which we'll have in evidence, but I think let me continue with some of the preamble, so I'll touch all the bases. My name is John Leonard. I'll be acting as chairman for this hearing. With me tonight is, to my immediate right, is Board Member Theodore Daber, and to my immediate left is Board Member Jeffrey Mullen. The rules of the board are going to be the same as at the first hearing. We'll first hear from the applicant and any witnesses, presentations, visual or otherwise, that the applicant wants to make. Then we'll see if anybody in the room has any questions. The only thing I'd like to say about questions is this is an adjudicatory hearing. It's not a trial, so that we'd ask respectfully that before anyone speaks, tell us your name and address and speak up nice and clear and loud so that we'll have an accurate record of the proceeding. And if you speak up several times during the proceeding, be sure to tell us your name and address again. I know it's a little bit of a pain, but we have the tape recorder here, and that's our only recorded evidence of the proceeding. And sometimes, since we're not familiar with people's voices, we won't know who's speaking unless you tell us what your name is. And we'd ask also that you direct your questions not to the applicant, not to Attorney Corcoran, but to the board. And 99 questions we'll just have Mr. Corcoran or his experts answer. But we're not going to cross-examine any witnesses at this particular hearing. And then we'll hear from any person present who wishes to speak in favor of the applicant, and we'll listen to anyone who wants to speak in opposition to the application. We're televising, at least somebody is televising, Milton Public TV, I think, is broadcasting, televising this application tonight. So if somebody is going to speak either in favor or in opposition, we may have them come right up here and sit up here, because otherwise the The microphone may not pick up your comments, and it's important, at least in TV land, that people understand what's happening at the hearing. So if you're going to speak publicly at this hearing, we'll have a space for you. You can come up, sit down right in front of the microphone, and we're delighted to hear from you. So with that as a preamble as to the procedures, we did receive several letters from the neighbors and a letter from the KFC, who sold the property. I'm going to summarize the letters because the first letter is rather lengthy, but they're all available. If anyone wants to see the letters or read the letters, just put up your hand and we'll pass them around. The only thing I'd exhort you to do is be sure you give them back to Mrs. Fitzgerald and not take them home with you because they're evidence at the hearing, and that can easily happen. So the first letter we have is from Mara Hamilton of 103 Dyer Avenue in Milton. It's dated November 27th, and she writes to the Board of Appeals saying that she understands that a proposal to develop the property into 6 condominium units has been filed. She talks about the lot containing 1,600 square feet and 65 feet of frontage on Thatcher Street. She notes the applicant is seeking variances, and she notes the different variances which are being required. Ms. Hamilton suggests that while the lot is oddly shaped, it lacks a required frontage, in her opinion, and she says this frontage would allow for a 1 or 2 single-family residence, but it isn't cause for a variance that would allow a 6-unit condominium. She states that the developer knew what the zoning requirements were when the developer bought the property, and that there is no hardship for the developer if the variance seeking to authorize 6 units isn't granted. She states the area is congested and that further congestion would be caused by 6 new units, and it would not serve the public interest, and that the fact that there would be increased tax receipts flowing to the town of Milton, in her opinion, is not sufficient grounds to award the variance. She further notes that the variance of 6 units would effectively nullify the zoning requirements for single-family homes on 7,500 square foot lots. So therefore, she opposes the proposal, and she requests the board to deny the application for variance. In addition to that, we received 3 letters, that they're all on a common form. So I'll summarize the common form and then tell you who sent the letters. The first letter is from Kathy Woeful, and she lives at 17 Center Street. And she writes that she opposes this application for 6 condominium units. So she says that the lot is too small for so many units. There's not enough parking. Traffic would be severely impacted. Children would have no play area. That the building is too close to the lot line and much too big. The building is not attractive. That the Milton Food Market needs more parking than is provided by the applicant here, and that the development would, in her opinion, decrease property values. She states that zoning is important to protect Milton's residential quality, and there is no good reason to overrule the zoning. She notes that, in her opinion, the town deserves much better than what is proposed. So we thank Ms. Wolf for that letter. We also, of course, thank Mrs. Hamilton for her letter. We have those same comments repeated in a letter dated November 30th, 2013, from Catherine E. Fossard. Well, and again, Patricia Hamilton, but we're only going to count her vote once. So Ms. Fossard states the same thing as Ms. Wolfel did. And we have another letter, form letter, November 27th, 2013, and this is from Tracy H. Ataya, A-T-T-A-Y-A, and Arthur B. Ataya Jr., and they live at 10 Standish Road, and They basically agree with Ms. Woeful and Ms. Fawcett. We also received a letter from the seller of the property, and this is a little bit long, somewhat of a sad letter, I might have to say, but I'll summarize it. It's to the board. It's not dated, but I think it was received by Mrs. Fitzgerald today. It's handwritten. I'll do my best to summarize it. It's from Bill Riley, who is the president of the Knights of Columbus Building Association, which was the former owner of the property. He says by vote of the members of the association, including himself, the property was sold to Mr. Mike Moxley, who is a well-respected property developer in the Boston area. He talks about in olden days, there was a very active council. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
That's fine.
Have you seen this?
I was aware of a letter, but I hadn't seen it.
He says in days gone by, it was a very active council, but with the advances in the ages of the membership declined, revenues decreased, and the property fell into disrepair, and the council fell on hard times financially, and actually had the unfortunate experience of being suspended by the Supreme Judicial Court of the Commonwealth for failure to pay overdue taxes, as well as other bills, including water usage taxes. He states that in the spring of this year, the State Council began an effort to revitalize the Milton Council, and they all did their best, but due to the dire finances, it was decided that it would be necessary to sell the property, which the council has owned since 1937. I think that's even before Mr. Mullen was born. He says the highest bidder he says bidder, so it must have gone to auction. He doesn't say that, but it sounds like it did go to auction. It was at $350,000 and was Mr. Michael Moxley. After paying the outstanding bills and expenses, the building association is left with about $266,000 in monies that are all going to be donated to local religious and nonprofit organizations, which is required. Nonprofits which are closing down. He recognizes that there are concerns over the development plans, but he says there can be no complaint that a neighborhood would be improved by a development of the property. He says he's observed the plans, and he thinks that the property would be enhanced by the removal of one or more of the houses, I think one of those being the KFC Hall and the other being a residence. And he's convinced that the area will be much improved by the development of the property. So he thanks us for our time, and we thank Mr. Riley for bringing us up to date on some of the past events and the unfortunate experience of closing down the charitable organization, at least a fraternal organization, but I think it's technically charitable. So with all of that, we'll have all of these letters as evidence at the hearing. We see Mr. Edward J. Corcoran II, present as Mr. Corcoran, as opposed to, I believe it was Mr. Hogan, is a frequent presence before the Board of Appeals. So good to see you again, Mr. Corcoran. Welcome back to the board, and we're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Ned Corcoran. I'm a resident of Milton. I have a law practice based in Quincy, and I've been retained by the proponent, Williams Avenue LLC, and its principal, Michael Moxley, to pursue a range of the variances that you described generally before you. I'd like to take the board through sort of a brief history, as I understand it, of the development, historic development of the property, description of of the property itself, general description of the area that surrounds the property immediately, which I would consider a non-conforming block. This property
Let me
is,
just stop you. Can everybody hear Mr. Corcoran?
No.
You people in the back, you having any trouble? So, yeah, Ned, why don't you,
I'll stand
Stand and-
I'm fighting a cold, my voice tends to trail in any event, so,
You want a continuance
No.
of the hearing?
no.
Let me just say this, if any time somebody at the hearing can't hear what's being said by any of the witnesses, just wave your hand or just let us know so we can make sure that everyone hears all of the evidence at the proceeding.
I apologize. So again, Ned Corcoran, I'm here on behalf of Michael Moxley and the developer Williams Avenue LLC, which purchased the property, Knights of Columbus property, in September of this year. As I started to say, I'll provide a brief discussion and overview of the history of the property itself as we understand it, the acquisition and description of the proposed reuse, the property's location within what I would term a non-conforming block of properties. The property itself is non-conforming with respect to zoning. Conditions of the property and the building itself, which I think rise to the level of a hardship necessary to establish the justification for variance. Proposed reuses and sort of the discussion of some meetings that we've undertaken and adjustments to plans that we've undertaken as we go forward. So, as I understand it, and learned, we met twice, we've had a series of meetings with public bodies in town and with neighbor groups. We met specifically twice with the Milton Historical Commission because the two buildings on the lot, the existing Knights of Columbus Hall and the single-family residence that are on the property, were constructed approximately 1881. As we understand, the house was constructed by a gentleman named Chuddick. He owned a paper distribution and warehousing business, and he built the Knights of Columbus building, the initial portion of that building, as a warehouse and distribution center for the property. So since at least 1881, the property would be considered pre-existing non-conforming in terms of zoning. Zoning obviously came in the late 1930s, but the property, which contains 16,665 square feet, has historically housed two facilities. One, a single-family residence dwelling, which would be allowed under zoning today, and two, a large institutional building that was initially built as a, as I say, as a warehouse and distribution facility. It was interesting with respect to its development and unique. Its internal members, the sort of bones of the property, the structural support system inside was steel reinforced, which is unusual at the time. It had a full basement. As it was acquired by the Knights of Columbus in the 1930s, that basement was converted into a bar. There was a liquor license associated with it. Some years ago, I was a coach of the Milton National Little League, and annually that's where the draft was held, in the basement.
In the bar?
In the bar.
Yes.
So,
Hopefully they weren't up.
Coach Mullen was
Coach Mullen was there too.
competing.
Several years.
Yep, he was the coach of another team, and so we had some interesting time. But be it as it may, the building has a substantially full basement. It has steel reinforcing members. It is a large building. It's approximately 2,300 square feet on the site. That's important because the existence of that building takes on a couple of characteristics. One, in our discussions with the Historical Commission, and I have some minutes of meetings and a vote that was taken by the Historical Commission, they believed that the preservation of the historic bones was an important component of a potential redevelopment of this property. Because of the age of the two buildings, they are deemed historic under the town's historic bylaw, preservation bylaw. And to demolish either would require a finding that either was not of historic consequence. So,
Can I ask you something, because that's always a question that intrigues me. just because the building was constructed over 100 years ago, the significance is that to demolish the structure, you have to get permission from the historical society.
That's correct.
But that doesn't mean necessarily the buildings have any historic significance whatsoever.
No.
Is that right?
and that's correct. And in fact, the single-family residence was determined specifically by the Historical Commission to not have any historical significance, and they authorized the issuance of a demolition permit. They did think that the plan to preserve the larger building with the bones of the building was of some benefit.
What jurisdiction did the historical commission is that?
It's a minor fact that goes more broadly to the historical nature.
I just want to make clear, you're not suggesting the historical commission is weighing in on this application in support of the application, are you?
Not at all, not at all.
Is there a letter that we can see?
Yes, Mr. Mullen reminds me. Thank you, Mr. Mullen, I appreciate it. Did the historic commission, you said they may have voted something. Do you have any documents on the vote, so we'll have it as part of our file?
I do. I have some additional exhibits that I'm going to submit during the course.
Okay, then why don't I defer my questions? You go forward with your presentation, and you can catch up.
So, we've got two old non-conforming buildings on a non-conforming lot, or at least one large non-conforming building on a non-conforming lot. And as the site plans have shown, and cut this up,
Could I stop you just for 1 second? If anybody in the audience really wants to get a good look at the site plans, don't be bashful. You can certainly come out of your seats and come over here so you can take a look at the plans. Okay? It may be difficult for somebody in the far right-hand corner of the hall to see the plans, so don't think you have to be confined to your seats. Go ahead, Mr. Cork.
Thank you. So, essentially, the lot in question contains two structures. There was a single-family residence on the northeasterly corner of the portion of the property.
It's still there, isn't it?
It's still there. Has not been demolished. It's still there.
I just wanted to be sure I saw the right property the
No,
other day.
it's there, and I have some photographs that I'm going to present, and I'll share that depicts all the existing conditions of the property. And there's the large Knights of Columbus building itself, which is on the right-hand side of the property. Both of those buildings exist and would today be non-conforming for a number of reasons. One, the large building is not set 10 feet off of the side yard. It's only 3.5 feet currently. That's an existing nonconformity. Two, it's not set within 30 feet off of the rear yard, it's approximately 27 feet. Three, it's probably actually 20, strike that. It's, the house itself is not set 10 feet off of the side lot. The property only has 65 square feet of frontage, so it is not conforming with respect to the lot size, all of which make it as it is.
And the lot's supposed to have 75 feet, is there 100, what's the?
The minimum requirement is 75 feet,
Yeah.
so it's about 10 feet shy. It is, this plan which copies of which I can share.
Oh, good, thank you, Mr.
Is taken from town website, sort of a plan of the area. I've colored in yellow the lot in question. It is surrounded, as I say, by a series of non-conforming properties. So I like to think that this is a non-conforming block and that every property that surrounds it is non-conforming in some way. Starting to the northwest, the property abuts two non-conforming commercial uses. One, the Milton Food Mart. Two, an old gas station that is now a motor vehicle repair facility. Each are pre-existing non-conforming. The Food Mart is set essentially on the combined property line. It is not set back in accordance with requirements of zoning. Moving south from Blue Hill, along Blue Hill Parkway, which is the major state roadway that is on the left-hand side, we have a building that, according to town records, contains 4 condominium units. Building is approximately 45 feet tall, which is 10 feet higher than allowed under maximum zoning. We think there may be 6 units within the 4 that are understood because there are 6 mailboxes. But be that as it may, it is, according to town records, there are 4 condominium units.
And when were they constructed?
The building,
Do you know, did you study the history of that property? Who owns it, when it was constructed? Are these lawful units, were they granted
I don't.
relief?
I don't know whether they were granted relief. All I know is that there are 4 condominium units in a building that is 45 feet tall that I think predates zoning in terms of how it was constructed. It is set on the lot line. It is not set back within the required distances from the side, the rear, which is the common lot line, by the minimum requirements. There's a
Can I stop you there? But I'm more concerned not about the dimensions of the building, about its use. And do you have evidence that the 4 units pre-existed zoning?
I don't. I don't have evidence as to when the building was converted to 4 condominiums. I do know that it is 4 condominiums in accordance with town records, and that the town at least recognizes that as a building that contains 4 units. The purpose of that is to identify from a nonconformity perspective what's around and how what's around reflects.
I understand that, but I'm just trying to figure out something about lawful uses. To me, don't you have to have some type of relief for that to be a lawful 4-family unit building on one lot? I mean, that's not permissible under our zoning bylaw, to the best of my knowledge.
It certainly isn't. I don't know whether any relief was lawfully granted, how it came about. What I do know is the town records provide that there are 4 units in a building that is 45 feet tall. That is certainly non-conforming to requirements of current zoning. Whether there was relief granted, I don't know. But I do know that there's a non-conformity here. I don't know what the town's position is with respect to that. That is, and the issue of that, I'm not sure is directly relevant to what my client's trying to do.
You may be exactly right. I hope I didn't buy one of those units and find out that it's not a lawful use.
We also know that there are,
The bank granted me financing for a property that's not being lawfully used.
It's on the Whittier Road.
I'm sorry?
the next property immediately to the south is a duplex that is on a single ownership, but it's 2 apartments. And the next building to the south is also 2 units, an apartment building. Again, not set back in accordance with requirements, but presumably pre-existing with respect to that. These 3 lots combined are equivalent in terms of land area to the Knights of Columbus property, slightly larger. Between them, there are, as a matter of town record, there are 8 units with 21 bedrooms.
You're saying town record, isn't that what exists out there in the field?
What exists out there
There's
in
no
the field.
representation that's a lawful use of those.
I'm not making any representation one way or the other with respect to what's there. I'm just reporting on what is there. It is 8 units, 21 bedrooms, and between them, I think something like 4 to 5 parking spaces
On site?
on site. To the south is the Parkway Community Baptist Church, which abuts all the way across the southerly boundary. That is certainly a conforming use in accordance with town zoning, and is a religious, and educational, authorized under the town's bylaw, and may exist in any zoning district in the town. But it is an institutional use. It is not a residential use maintained in conformity with so-called residency zoning. It exists as pursuant to an exemption in the zoning associated with institutional use. To the southeast, at 7 Laurel Road, is a 2-family unit. And to the east, at combination 1 and 3 Laurel Road, is a single-family dwelling, which is on a substandard sized lot and is a building that is not set back sufficiently from either front side or rear yard with respect to. So
And does that pre-exist zoning as well?
my assumption
believe
is it may pre-exist zoning. So I think of this as sort of a non-conforming block. And I think that's an important consideration for the board in understanding more broadly, the derogation of intent of the bylaw argument, importantly.
If you take the bylaw as applying to that lot and not the area in which the property sits.
So, because the ultimate question is whether the conversion of an pre-existing non-conforming use, a combination of a single-family dwelling and a large institutional warehouse-type property that's had different types of uses over time, and which combine certainly a non-conforming to zoning requirements, is whether it's reasonable to consider that now this property ought to be governed specifically by the residency requirements, that it ought to be developed solely for purposes allowed under zoning, either as a single family or 2-family with a special permit. So
How else is it going to be developed? You're
Well-
seeking relief from residency
I
zoning.
am seeking relief.
You're not saying residency zoning doesn't apply to this?
No, it doesn't. What I'm seeking relief, in part because the notion of applying residency standards today, for a property that's surrounded completely by nonconformity, I think is inappropriate and ought to be considered for the relief that's being granted. Now, that's significant and important consideration for the ability to redevelop this property as either a single or a 2-family complex, deals with the issue of the structure itself. That structure, 2,700 square feet with a full basement, would be significantly expensive to demolish, to fill, to level, in order to be able to create a lot that could be developed in accordance with residency zoning. Chapter 40, Section 10, which is as you know, is the variance statute, recognizes that the existence of a structure can rise to the level of a hardship if the cost to deal with that structure is beyond what's reasonable in accordance with the ability to redevelop. In fact, I provided a memorandum to the board in advance of this hearing that cites a case of Johnson versus Board of Appeals of Wareham, in which, in a similar setting, a residence zone where there was a church, structurally sound, large church surrounded within a residence zone, but on a main street with commercial properties across the street, that the existence of this structure and the ability to redevelop that, and the cost to remove that structure for purposes of complying with zoning created a financial hardship that rose to the level of a variance. And in addition, given the nature of the area and the nonconformities that surround it, it's clear to us that the property could not be redeveloped under residency zone to achieve values necessary to redevelop for the purpose. So you've got, because of commercial nonconformity, other nonconformities, we have a situation where it's difficult. So what I'd like to do, at this point, I have two sets of photographs. One is a set of photographs that was part of a PowerPoint presentation that I had given previously. Those photographs of existing conditions of the property taken.
I'm sorry, to whom did you make a PowerPoint presentation?
Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, in September and October. And so, and the second set of photographs that were taken recently that show modifications. And I have some, unfortunately, just black and white copies that I'll share with.
Besides that, yeah. Let me ask you this, Mr. Corcoran. You recognize well, don't you, that certainly the selectmen have no jurisdiction over this particular application, is that true?
Yes, I recognize that
Then
this,
the planning board doesn't have any
this board-
present jurisdiction,
yes.
is that true? Okay, tell us what happened at the Board of Selectmen hearing.
we made a presentation to the Board of Selectmen on October 3rd where we discussed the plans to redevelop, the obvious need for variances.
Was it a publicly noticed meeting so that the citizens could come and watch the presentation and participate, or?
There was a publicly noticed meeting. I don't know whether there was no specific notification with respect to.
Whether this particular development project was publicly advertised?
No.
So that people knew that the selectmen were going to hear about it?
No.
No. How about for the planning board? Did they have, was there public notice of a
There was-
potential?
Simply in their normal posting. There was not a formal notification process. That if approved, we do need to go back to the board, to the planning board for site plan approval. That would be formally noticed, and a separate set of hearings would be required.
Can I ask you something? Why didn't you go to the planning board in the first instance to get site plan approval, rather than come to the Board of Appeals looking for this type of variance, and then going to the planning board?
Because I don't think I have the right to get site plan approval for a project, a development that's not authorized under law.
You don't, but don't you recognize that in numerous instances, people go to the planning board on an advisory basis to see what they think of the plans, and see what they think of the development, and to see what they think of the intensity of the development, and then they come back to the Board of Appeals? Doesn't that commonly happen here?
It did, and we had,
Wasn't that one of the reasons you went to the planning board and made a PowerPoint presentation?
exactly, we did, and we made a presentation, and quite frankly, there's a difference of opinion between myself and the chairman of the planning board as to whether or not we should pursue a rezoning effort, which would take 18 months and is uncertain, or whether we should pursue a variance.
Or pursue some other type of relief. Isn't there some other type of, couldn't you do some type of a planned unit development, or is this too small for a?
It's too small. You need, under the state statutes dealing with PUD, planned unit development, you need a minimum of 60,000 square feet lot area to qualify. You have to have a mix of uses. So you would need more than just residential uses. You need a combination of some other uses. There would be an overlay. And you would need, I think, the willing participation of other property owners to join in if you were going to rezone a property that is only 16,000 square feet. Mr. Moxley has made efforts and overtures to acquire property to the east, not able to do it. Property, commercial property to the west, unable to do it. That certainly would make a much more attractive development. It would clean up, which is pretty much an eyesore as part of a quote-unquote gateway to the town. The Blue Hills Parkway comes in from Mattapan section of Boston, about a quarter of a mile away. It's one of the first things you see as you sweep around the corner. You see this property. So you're correct to suggest that you could pursue an alternative form of relief, which would be a negotiation of a zoning bylaw change that would be presented to town meeting next May, that would then be subject to review by the Attorney General, if approved by town meeting, be subject to review of Attorney General, and then the permit process that would come out of that. That's an 18-month timeframe that the developer, no reasonable developer would undertake, in my opinion, under this, the redevelopment of this site.
I don't want to be difficult with you, Mr. Corcoran, but did you say that that is the position of Mr. Whiteside, the planning board chairman? He thinks that's the route you should.
He thinks that's the route we should have taken. I had a strong disagreement with him about that. His opinion is that that a variance is not the appropriate way to change the use of this property. And I said, in general, I would agree with that. But we've got a property that qualifies, that I think, and as I go forward, it meets the standards set out in the Johnson case and a couple of other cases that deal with hardship associated with the specific existence of structures on the property, and the notion of redeveloping in a mixed-use area that is not homogeneously residential. This is not a homogeneous, single-family resident area of the town.
Can I ask you a question? Did the LLC here, it bought this property outright, is that true?
Bought the property outright.
And did it buy it at auction? Because there was a reference in.
No auction.
It was
No, it was a bid.
a series of,
Oh,
bid.
sealed bids, okay, sealed bids.
so the broker, James Donnelly, who represented the Knights
The
in the
Knights.
sale, attempted to sell the property, first by reaching out to potential users. I think there were a couple of churches that came and made a proposal. They reached out to the temple as an alternative site for the temple. Temple wasn't interested. Other churches weren't able, couldn't see to the cost of renovating and dealing with traffic, parking issues associated with the site. So they didn't make formal proposals. What Mr. Donnelly then did was he made available a quick sort of bid process, sealed proposals for the purchase of the property. At risk, certainly, but for the purchase of the property, with the understanding that whatever would have to happen, you would need to get some sort of relief to allow it to happen.
But it wasn't conditioned on receiving it.
It was not conditioned. It was an outright sale with no conditions.
And-
Mr. Moxley.
And most developers seeking to acquire a property of this would make it subject. Wouldn't they normally make it subject to receiving the right to do the particular project?
Some would. Many would. Not everyone would.
Was that allowable under the bid?
I don't know, but it was not, but as you saw from Mr. Riley's letter, the property itself was underwater with respect to obligations of the Knights of Columbus, with respect to taxes owed on the single-family residents, water bills for both properties, and they needed to sell.
Were there liens filed against the property by the town, seeking to foreclose?
There were no foreclosure liens, but it was clear that they were underwater and that there were back taxes owed, and they needed to find a way to get out from under and move forward. I don't know whether there was a specific threat of town foreclosure, but there was certainly that concern. So there was a need to sell, and the purchases were sort of at risk, and there were three bids.
Three bidders. And
Mr. Moxley was the highest bid.
bid.
That's right.
And he's taken title to the property,
taking title to the property into the ownership.
in the name of the LLC.
Williams Avenue LLC, that's correct.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Mr. Moxley has over 30 years of development history, mostly in the city of Boston. Some years ago, he developed a couple of the homes within Indian Cliffs, but hasn't done anything more recently in Milton for quite some time. And this is fairly consistent with Mr. Moxley's approach. He purchases, if he needs variances, he seeks variances, he does what he can. He'll generally have a Plan B, does have a Plan B here, but he seeks to do what is best for the community and for the neighborhood. And so what he's proposing, I think, is a handsome and attractive reuse. It's a more intense use, certainly. 6 dwellings within a reconstructed building, but it takes advantage of that existing structure, and it avoids the cost associated with demolishing that structure, infilling the foundation, doing all the things necessary to achieve a level lot that you could then go forward and think about developing new homes. And given the fact that it is surrounded by these other non-conforming properties, Mike, in his own opinion, and Robert McAuliffe, who's a broker, who's also involved in representing the property, would testify that the values that could be attracted from a single-family residence don't come close to the costs associated with what's necessary to level the site and prepare it to construct a single-family residence. It costs well in excess of $100,000 to address the site development issues associated with the demolition of this building, which is in poor shape, cannot be rehabilitated, fill in the foundations. He's already addressed the issue of asbestos. The first set of photographs showed a white siding. Those were asbestos-laden.
This is on the KFC Hall?
On both buildings.
Both buildings?
Both buildings were encased in asbestos. He has spent $23,000 to address the demolition of just the asbestos with respect to those buildings. He would then have to fill in a foundation that is essentially 2,700 square feet, demolish the concrete structures, fill it, level it. There's an existing septic system, which is old, outdated, needs to be addressed, would have to be filled. He proposes new sewer connection, new water connection, all new utilities. But that's a cost. So the site costs themselves to achieve a site that is capable of being developed under a residency zoning, well in excess of $100,000, based on his own experience as a contractor, developer, a builder. He has estimated that that's well in excess of $100,000. The effect of that building, and it is not usual in terms of the case law that's out there, but the Massachusetts appellate courts have recognized in the case of Johnson versus...
Well, you've already said that, but I'm more concerned about the economics, because if you have $100,000 in site costs, you could clearly build a fancy residence there that would be a $500,000, $600,000 residence. But are you telling us that people, because of the uses in the area, people wouldn't buy that type of residence? Is that what you're saying? It's not economically feasible
Exactly.
under the circumstances?
Exactly. That you
Because you're
could...
next to a repair shop.
You're next to an old food mart, a repair shop, a 4-family that looms over the top of you at 45 feet, a two-family, a single family that is not in good repair. And the combination of those things, also its location and existence on a state roadway, a high-volume town roadway, make it very difficult to think that a single-family dwelling could be developed at any reasonable cost to generate any sort of a return necessary to develop under residency zone. Couldn't be done.
Can I ask a cruel question? I don't mean it to be cruel. didn't you know all this going in when you bought the lot? I mean,
He did.
an experienced developer could tell you what it would cost to destroy the buildings, maybe not the asbestos, maybe he didn't do testing. And you knew the traffic conditions out there. Didn't you know all this going in?
He did,
Oh, not all of it.
some of it, but
We had a septic system that, we had a building that thought was tied in to the sewerage with the house.
Okay, and it wasn't?
No, the septic system that was there with that building is still there. And it's been
Is it-
used for
is it
years and
functional?
years. Huh?
Is it functioning?
No,
No,
no, it's full solid with solids.
okay.
It was used for years. But if you look at the house and look where the pipe come out of the building, because the water flood that building is coming across somebody else's lot as well. We found out after. The town had found it on the lot on the side street.
Why don't you continue, Mr. Corcoran? I'm sorry to interrupt.
So, the answer is yes, there was some understanding of site development costs, but in land cases versus the city of Taunton, you can't hold, the developer didn't create the nonconformities, he didn't create the economic conditions, he purchased into it, but he can't be held to have created those conditions
I don't
such
think,
that you.
nobody's saying that. It's just a question of if he knew what the conditions were and he bought into those conditions, why isn't he burdened by them, and why can he expect some type of extraordinary relief from conditions that he knew he was buying into?
Well, because he was aware of some of it, and he had a reasonable expectation that he could achieve relief necessary.
Okay, now why don't you go on? I don't mean to.
The alternative is that whatever happens here, otherwise, I mean, the Knights couldn't sell it to somebody who wasn't going to come in and take some amount of risk to change, to seek relief, so that they could generate a project that would result in an improvement to the property and to the area. There's clearly a risk that was taken with respect to that. I contend that that's a very reasonable risk, given the
Yeah, but we're not
circumstances.
involved in developers' risks. That's Mr. Moxley. He's got the money. He can develop anything he wants. He can buy anything.
But
That's not our
That's
concern.
understood, but let's go back one layer. We have the Knights of Columbus, which owns that property. If they don't find a buyer like Mr. Moxley, who's going to come forward and at least try to do something that is reasonable, you end up with nothing. You end up with two buildings that are vacant, that are in poor condition, that continue to deteriorate, they're going to continue to be a drain on the values
Sell it
around
to
it.
the town. Why couldn't the town buy the property and turn it into a parking lot?
Town could do it if town meeting.
And there'd be
could-
no problem parking in the area.
Right, but town couldn't, there's no way that would require the town to go to town meeting for access to funds. There's no certainty to the town meeting, given the existing conditions in the town's budget, Prop 2.5, periodical Prop 2.5 fights that go on in this town to secure funding, to maintain level funding for services, that the town would come in and purchase this property for whatever reasonable value that might be.
So there was no discussion with the town about acquiring the
Not that I'm
property?
aware of.
Either
That
as
would-
open space or for parking or for some other,
No.
for a park or municipal use or something like that?
I suppose, but then the town would have to say, okay, what's the cost to demolish those buildings, to infill?
Well, I think they would. I just want to know whether there was any discussion
that I'm aware
with
of.
the town or the planner's office or the selectmen as to those alternatives.
Not that I'm aware
Okay,
of.
thank you.
So, there are three, at the end of the day, there are really, I think, three alternative uses that can be put. One is the economic use that's being proposed, 6 units in a redeveloped building. A more dense unit development under comprehensive permit, under the state's Chapter 40B law. Presumably could get 10, 15 lots, and is a consideration.
You mean units?
Units, correct, on that same lot, and is a consideration if variance is not able to be secured. Or some other institutional use that could come in and take advantage of the existing building and address whatever parking requirements there might be. I think at the end of the day, those are your three options. And I think of the three, the proposal that's on the table is certainly superior for the neighborhood and for the town.
So you're saying, are you telling the board, Mr. Corcoran, because I don't want to misunderstand you, when you're talking about 40Bs and other institutional uses, that if you don't get 6 units, that the whole project is not feasible, and therefore you use other,
Exactly.
you go to other alternative
Go to other
uses?
alternatives, that's right. We need a variance, we need 6 units. If we can't get 6 units, the project is not economically feasible, and it moves on to whatever else might happen.
Oh,
And whether-
okay, that's a strong position to take, but that's, at least you're being clear.
Yeah, and we've been clear on that.
That's why you didn't go to the planning board, because you know the planning board wouldn't give you 6 units here. They'd probably give you 3 or 4 units, and that would not be economically feasible for your objectives.
Exactly. My experience before the planning board on the rezoning of property, and I've drafted and negotiated rezoning efforts on behalf of multiple clients, other parts of town, is that it's an extensive process of negotiation, site plan development, what you would do, how you would do it. The zoning is,
You know how long 40Bs take to get going and how expensive they are to even go through the application process? I think you do, because
I
you're
do.
an experienced
I
attorney
do,
representing
and I think that,
developers.
and I think it is a process that is faster and more certain of outcome than a process that would require a rezoning effort.
But certainly not more profitable, don't you agree there? The
Well-
money you squeeze out of 40Bs is very, very
Mr.
difficult, particularly on
Mr. Mo-
on a lot this.
Mr. Moxley's got a fair amount of experience in the area of development of affordable housing. He's confident in his ability to achieve a reasonable value and a reasonable return. He paid $350,000 plus additional costs associated with seeking to permit this use through a variance. If he doesn't get it, he moves on.
Okay, well, that's his prerogative. Mr. Moxley can
Understood.
do anything he wants.
Understood.
His property.
And I think at the end of the day, the alternative uses are worse, although available as a matter of right, potentially, than what is being proposed for the variance.
You've made that perfectly clear.
One of the other, I think, important considerations, and one of the things we heard when we had we did have one invitation to neighbors meeting at the library in September. And one of the loud concerns that they heard was the impact of parking associated, particularly with the existing commercial uses, obviously also with respect to the development of the property in question. Currently, this lot serves as the only off-street parking for the commercial uses, particularly the food mart in this location. That's just a historic use. There's no right to do it.
Well, there's no lease or
There's no
license?
lease, there's no license, there's no nothing. It was just,
Does the food mart pay for those parking spaces?
No.
Do they pay a nominal fee? Or
no. They pay nothing, and they paid nothing historically.
because of the charitable use of the Knights of Columbus?
Presumably because the
Wanted
Knights
to be
of-
good neighbors?
either because they were being good neighbors or there were benign neglect or whatever what was going on, there was no lease of spaces. The dumpster that is owned here sits approximately here. It straddles the line. There's a dumpster in this,
Is there any claim by the food mart that they've acquired title to those 4 spaces by adverse possession?
they thought they had, but there's no record of it. And there was an indication that, from the O'Neill family, that they thought they had acquired by adverse possession, but there has been no record of it.
Well, there's been no adjudication of it.
They thought there was an adjudication. There's no record of it. And there's been a thorough search for it. With Mr. Moxley,
Is that an issue to consider as part of this development?
it
That
is.
They may file a petition with the land court to claim those 4 spaces?
No, at this point, I don't think so. I mean, if they want to go ahead and try and do that, that's, that's their business. What Mr. Moxley has done is reached agreement with the owners of the food mart to provide 4 spaces.
I see. So he's reached an agreement.
So he's reached an agreement to provide 4 spaces for use during the day for the customers of the food mart.
Is that free of charge?
Yeah.
Or is there a fee? Free of charge?
Free of charge.
Right. Okay.
And what that does, more broadly, is it takes the churn of commercial traffic for this property and keeps it off of Laurel Road, Thatcher Street.
4 spaces would do that?
To some degree, sure. I mean, if they can't park in here, they're gonna go somewhere.
Yeah, can they park on the front? I didn't look at the Milton Food Market.
The town, a few years ago, changed the frontage. There used to be unlimited parking, well, except for the opening here, used to be parking here and here. The town, in its efforts to mitigate cut-through traffic on Thatcher Street, created this bump-out sidewalk with planters both sides. There's a couple of spaces that are available here, but they eliminated a number of spaces or otherwise proximate to the entry. It makes it much more difficult for customers here to access. So Mr. Moxley has agreed to allow parking as a part of the site plan. So,
Thank you.
so one of the issues obviously is the notion of parking. And the site plan we've been back and forth a little bit with respect to the location of parking spaces and their relationship to the budding properties, particularly the Laurel Road property to the east. We've got one alternative, which is to slide back essentially to the property line, which divides the 2 lots that are owned jointly at 1 and 3 Laurel Road. The house sits essentially on the squarish lot. Is to slide it. There's been a recommendation that we slide it all the way to the back, which we thought was inappropriate, given the impact that parking spaces directly behind a single-family dwelling might have. So we've pushed it, Trey, back here, just to the lot, 10 spaces, so that we could maximize the green area to the front of the lot. It would make a more attractive presentation to the property, so if you were viewing it from Thatcher Street and from Laurel Road, Brook Road, with fencing, 3 trees, and other plantings. There was an alternative that is under consideration, and certainly we're ambivalent to which one to take. And that is that we would slide the parking further away from the residence with 8 spaces and a tray, and 2 more closely to Thatcher Street. There's some concern that the visibility of those would detract from the presentation here. And so, listening back and forth, what's the more appropriate location for those spaces? There are 6 spaces that would be hard against the food mart, right against the property line. 4, as I say, that would be dedicated during the day for the customers of the food mart and available in the evening for guests and visitors of the unit owners, and 2 additional dedicated. So there would be 2 spaces dedicated to each of the 6 units with 4 available for spillover parking. That's essentially in total a 1-to-1. It's with 18 bedrooms, 6 units. That's almost a 1-to-1 parking ratio. There's room to create a little more parking if necessary, but again, we introduce impacts to that parking which we don't think are necessary to the abutting property owner. Now, there is one modification to the site plan that's represented here, and represented in an amendment, a proposed amendment to the table that was attached to the memorandum. And these are the copies of the 2 alternatives that I submit to the board. and I have copies of the amendment and the plan so that people in the audience can view. The one amendment is that with respect to the rear yard relief, we propose a deck of 2 feet off the ground. That is a structure that creates a 12.5-foot encroachment on the rear lot line. In discussion with the new owners of the property immediately to the west of the property, we've agreed to modify, to put in a patio that will be lower to the ground, and with a privacy, there'd be new fencing along a 6-foot fence, but that would create more privacy for both residents of the 2 units in this building in here. So the patio eliminates the need, or reduces the setback requirement from 12.5 feet to 18.5 feet, which would be set off the rear corner of the property. So we still need a variance because it's within the 30-foot setback, but
On the, can I ask you a question? On that? So on that one, would you need a variance if you weren't adding 7.2 feet to the end of the building?
well, that is a separate correction to the plan. In reevaluating this, the rear yard existing setback, the setback right now is non-conforming because there's a bunker structure that kind of goes down to the back, to the rear. That's going to be removed. There's a 7.2 foot section of the rear of the building, which is 1.5 stories. It comes in to what's existing at 2.5 stories, about 31 feet. That would be, the plan was originally drawn as it was understood by the engineer and the architect, that was an addition. That's not an addition, that's a removal and a replacement, but it's a 3-story, it would be a 3-story replacement. It's still within the 30-foot setback, but it's an existing nonconformity at 18.5 feet.
But the current, so you've got a lower structure to the immediate, in that end. You're going to demolish that and then rebuild it to the uniform height, the new uniform height, because the building's getting higher as well, right?
So
Wow.
that's 7.5 feet, and so there's no
Color-coded
change.
three-dimensional view of this, really.
So I do have,
Yeah.
It's not here.
No, I know. Just on that, just one of the things that's confusing about the plans a little bit, I think, is showing new elements versus existing. And I think the board is interested in the new elements of the building, because one of the things that's happening is, as you add elements to the building, you're increasing current nonconformities. And that's what happens in the rear, right? Because even if you weren't demolishing the lower half, by adding on, and this is what happens all the time with additions, still non-conforming, right? On the rear, I don't know if that would be the rear, I guess it would be the rear. You're adding on top of that, and that also happens in the front, right?
it happens
So the
all,
front's got
it happens to
that little portico, and then in the roof.
it happens to the entire building.
Yeah. Except in the back, except on the
No.
on the west
The
side.
existing building, even the.
Yeah. Thanks, Ted.
Even the existing building is at 31 feet.
No, I know, but you're not adding anything on the west, are you? The back?
No,
Yeah, you can't, right?
we can't.
Yeah.
We're not,
But if you could, you might.
we are not changing the footprint of the building as it relates to the side yard setback. We're coming forward
Yeah,
towards
yeah.
the street.
And you're exacerbating that setback as as to that portion.
We
of the
are,
property.
we're exacerbating,
Understand.
right, with that setback by
Yeah.
coming further in this direction.
Yeah.
And we're going to three stories at 35 feet. So along the full length, it's 35 feet.
Yeah.
The relief necessary is 3 stories. It's not from the height.
I hear you, yeah, understood. Yep.
And so the design of the building is such that it takes advantage of the steel reinforcing members within the building to create units, because each one is set 16 feet approximately apart, and you can build within that existing structure, which is why, in the conversation with the Historical Commission, they just thought it was significant that the proposed reuse of the bones of the structure was significant. Again, no jurisdiction.
You know, as time passes, we forget things, Ned. And earlier in the presentation, I was going to ask you if I didn't, and if I did ask you, correct me, whether the Historical Commission ever came to a vote or provided any written materials. And I don't think we got any materials.
You didn't, and I have a copy. Again, I'll share. This is a copy, it's attached to an email to me from Stephen O'Donnell, who's the chairman of the Historical Commission. It simply contains a letter that was drafted following a meeting contained on September 30th to Mr. Prondak, essentially authorizing the demolition of the single-family structure and the minute that was associated with that discussion.
Just authorizing the demolition.
Authorizing the demolition.
I guess we'll take it as far as the record, but there was no other votes or other documents that they prepared.
No, there was nothing other. We did present here, there was a suggestion that we modify the appearance of the elevation of the building as it faces Thatcher Street, so that it would be treated as a front door view of the building from Thatcher and Brook. And so this modification was made to bring the main entrance to this unit at the end, so to the face the front, so that this appears more as a front door, rather than just a side treatment, such as you see at the rear.
But the rear doors of Unit 6 and Unit 1 are on the ends of the building, is that right? There's only 4 rear doors in the back, right?
Yeah.
And so, and this east elevation, to be true to the rendering, it should show the stairs and the deck. Is that right? Am I reading that correctly? East elevation, underneath the portico, isn't there a set of stairs coming out?
Stairs here.
Unit 1.
Stairs here, stairs here.
No, I know, but Unit 1, there's stairs on the side, right?
The stairs are here.
No, I understand, but on the elevation, the question is whether they're recessed into the building or they're protruding.
No, they're protruding.
So they should be shown on the elevation, right?
Either front or the rear.
The front.
Front is recessed.
Front is recessed,
sorry.
so you don't see them in the elevation.
Yes.
But you could see the deck if you're looking at that from the courtyard, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's a rendition, but I just wanted to make sure that we were looking at that right elevation. Looking at it, the deck, the stairs are recessed, so you walk in and so that window is actually outside.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. And then behind that is a small deck that will serve as the rear door.
The rear,
There's only 2 doors.
yeah, that's a continuous deck on the rear.
Right, I know, but that door that we're looking at in the front of the building is the rear door to the unit.
That's right. And the same
Two
with the
doors.
other.
Same with the back.
Yeah.
There's 4 doors in the back and a rear door in each. Okay.
And the west elevation is designed to meet current fire
Size of the windows.
code, size of windows, number of openings, percentage of openings compared to the total of the wall. There are specific limitations in the fire code with respect to that. So the building, as redeveloped, becomes much safer with respect to the abutting properties that are immediately.
It's on the bottom there. It's on the very bottom.
And that was a concern of Mr. Prondax at the time when he was reviewing the plans, to make sure that what was being submitted would meet necessary code, And we needed to show that to the board, to what was being proposed.
Be nice to see the skeleton of the building through that rendering. I'm interested in how big the current building is as compared to that. Small.
Small, we propose to come forward.
Trying to leverage the steel, right? That's what
Yeah,
I'm
the
hearing.
steel is 15 feet in between, and that's what the units fit in between.
I see.
Square feet, building area
It goes
now?
Front to back.
Now, I don't know the total.
Just in that one building? Yeah.
The total lot coverage,
Lot coverage is 2,700 some, but, so the square footage in the building would be,
I don't have a calculation for what the current square footage of the building with the multiples of floors. And
but after this, it would be
that's
9186.
right. We are adding towards the front, we propose to add towards the front, extending the side yard encroachment along the 3.5 foot, but certainly well back from the 30-foot front yard setback requirement under the proposal zoning. And we would be going to approximately 9,186 feet of total gross floor area within the building. And because the building, the roof line is set, so there are porches, decks up on the 5 decks proposed on the roof line, but the coverage of the area under the roof meets as a story. It's not a half a story, it's a full story. The proposal is for master bedrooms, suites on the 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, and living area on the 1st floor. And those are depicted on floor plans that I submitted, and these are copies of proposed floor plans, including basement plans. Basement would be used for storage. Basements are its full basement proposed with the demising walls for each unit. And then, difficult to see, and I don't have other copies, but the layout is essentially 1st floor, kitchen and living area with bath, 2nd floor, 2 bedrooms with bath, 3rd floor, master bedroom suite with bath, and 5 of the unit owners would get that sort of outdoor living space, the deck built into the roof line, facing Laurel Road, east of the elevation. Just have a moment. So one of the concerns that we've heard, I think loud and clear, although perhaps under the surface of discussion, from a number of people, certainly members of the planning board in our discussions with the planning board and others, that the real issue is the number of bedrooms that are proposed and what the impact of those bedrooms might have on schools with the type of occupants coming in.
Is that a legitimate consideration for the Board of Appeals?
I think it's a legitimate,
Schools are
I
gonna
think
have-
it's a more legit, it's not specifically, so it is, you know, whether or not we qualify for variance because of hardship and because of the non-substantial derogation of the intent of the bylaw.
Right, we can't deny you a variance if you should have one as a matter of good conscience in the zoning bylaw, because the schools are going to have 20 new students.
No, but a significant consideration, I think, to some of the opposition to the notion of what's being proposed goes to the density and the impacts of the density with respect to the units. 3 bedrooms in each unit equates presumably to children who might be attending the schools. That families would move in as opposed to, let's say, a divorced husband or other single.
Look, I understand, but let me stop you, Mr. Corcoran, with all due
No.
respect.
No.
I don't care what people think about divorced people, or whether they have 9 kids or 2 kids. That's not
That's
relevant
that's
to
fine.
this
All
board's
all I am,
It's not relevant.
then I
We're
won't
not
go
gonna go
further.
there.
So 3 bedrooms is what's
They're
being.
saying it's too intense and it's too busy a development, that's one thing.
Yeah. So 3, and the impacts of 3, we've heard for a number of reasons, is significant. It's a concern for some in the town.
Well, let me ask you this, just to put this one to bed, because we're on television here. Number one, certainly the selectmen never raised that as an issue of concern, and certainly Mr. Whiteside and the planning board never raised that as an issue of concern.
No, the
Is that fair to say?
members of the planning board did raise that as an issue of concern.
They did.
In a meeting conducted last night downstairs. There was a significant concern raised with respect to the number of bedrooms and the impact of the number of bedrooms on the development, potentially with respect to the schools, et cetera. Until this morning, we have been steadfast in the position that we needed 3 bedrooms to make the development work. Mr. Moxley-
Economic.
Economic.
Yes.
Mr. Moxley's taken a second evaluation of that. He's discussed it with Mr. McAuliffe and others who are familiar with the real estate market. They believe that the market would be equivalent with respect to 3s or 2s. And so what Mr. Moxley is proposing is to reduce the number of bedrooms in each unit from 3 to 2. That one of the bedrooms would be converted to a den, might be available for part-time sleeping for visiting children, but certainly would not be a full-time configuration. That changes the equation under the town zoning with respect to parking. We still would provide the amount of parking that's been requested.
Thank you.
That's a broader consideration. It's an important social consideration more broadly for the town. Certainly not specific to the board's determination, but I think it's important, and I think it's an important consideration more broadly.
Let me just state from my personal perspective, and I'm not speaking for the board, I don't think that's a consideration for the board under any circumstances, but my colleagues could disagree with me on that one. But why don't you continue with your present, have you finished your presentation? or
I think I'm
you're going to be
substantially
finishing?
finished.
It's
If I-
9:12, so.
Yes, I know, and I appreciate the time. I think I would finish by simply reiterating the point associated with the general area of the property, the conditions of the existing property, the impact that the structure has with respect to the ability to redevelop. It's clearly defined as a consideration within the statute itself with respect to determination of hardship, and it is determined with respect to the courts, particularly in the Wareham case. And that the combination of concerns, of issues with respect to the property could not generate a return sufficient to allow redevelopment in accordance with current zoning. Just can't be done. And so with that, I'll stop. Happy to entertain further questions, and I can respond as appropriate. Thank
Well,
you.
we've asked you a lot of questions, I'm not sure. Let me see if Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions, further questions for Mr.
Not right now.
Corcoran? Mr. Daber, do you have any questions of Mr. Corcoran?
I guess the only question, I did read that Johnson case, which,
We knew you did.
what?
We knew you read it.
Go ahead.
I'm sure
I
you
was
guys
looking,
read
we
it
were
too,
looking,
right?
I did read
Yeah,
it,
you
but I
guys
didn't
read it
bring a
too.
copy with me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But I mean, it talks about, I mean, in that case, the church was to be converted to commercial or office suites because there was a determination that no feasible use could be made of the property under existing zoning. Not necessarily economically feasible use, but physically feasible use because of the shape of the church. I mean, are you saying here that because of the shape of that building, and we don't know how many square feet it is now because I guess you don't have a measurement, but are you saying that because of the shape of that building, no it cannot feasibly be used for like a two-family if a special permit were granted as to two-family use?
Yes, it's too large.
Well, we don't, yeah, but we don't know what the square footage is. I mean,
Well,
how,
it's 2,700 square foot footprint, which is which is a substantial size of a footprint of a building. Could you put in two families? Sure. Could you sell them? No.
Why do you say you couldn't sell them?
Because you couldn't sell them
Because the cost of
for the
the
cost
purchase of the lot and the development
combination of
costs
the
are too
purpose,
much.
the purchase, the demolition of the single family, the necessary demolition of elements of the existing large building, if you would convert it to reasonably scaled, sort of 2 units, you couldn't generate the return necessary to achieve the return on the cost.
You're saying the purchase price would have to be set so high that it would be so far above market, nobody would buy them.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
but that's a matter of the cost and not of the physical aspects of the property, which is referred to, I think, in the case, and subsequent cases discussing
I
it.
think the case referred to the feasibility of redeveloping that building. It was a sound structure. It was a large structure. It lent itself well to a commercial use, an office building. It was surrounded by residential. It was on Route 6, across from other commercial. The court determined that it was not a homogeneous zoning area, similar to this, and that the presence and the condition of that structure rendered it infeasible, economically infeasible to redevelop.
Okay, I don't want to get into too long a discussion. That's, with all due respect, not the way I read a subsequent case that talked about it, but I don't have any further questions.
Okay. Mr. Corcoran, do you have any other, let me do this. Just for informational purposes, do you have any other witnesses you're going to be presenting
I
tonight?
don't. I've identified people, Mr. McAuliffe, Mr. Donnelly, who could testify if necessary with respect to specific value. What I would represent to you is that in their opinion, you could not achieve the resale values necessary to support the cost to develop. You couldn't achieve, anything north of $300,000 per unit to sell residents in that area, given the condition of the area, given the surrounding nonconformity, given the condition of the lot. It would cost you in excess of $600,000 to achieve a $600,000 return. That's just economically infeasible. That creates an economic hardship.
Okay. Great. So if you're not going to call any additional witnesses, let me do this then. Let's ask if there's anybody present this evening who has questions about this project for Mr. Corcoran or any of his consultants who are here. And once we finish some questions, if you have them, then we'll open them up to people who want to speak in support of the application, and then people who want to speak in opposition to the application. So dealing with questions regarding the project, which may be outstanding. Does anybody have any of those questions? Yes, ma'am. Tell us your name and address, please.
Cynthia Clark.
And Ms. Clark, you have to come up
Just
here.
to ask a question.
Regretfully, it won't be picked up, and
Okay.
the editors in the TV room there will come out and take us to task.
Cynthia Clark, 167 Brook Road. It's actually my mother's house, but I live there, and it's our family home. I just wanted
I'm
to know.
sorry, could you just show where that house is about on the map?
It
It might
is-
not be.
That one. Yes,
Great.
sure.
What's your
Thank you.
question, ma'am?
Pardon?
What is your question?
Okay, I'm just wondering.
boat
what
in the
are
yard?
Units selling for?
Ah,
Is that the one with the boat in the yard?
Is it what?
Does that have a boat in the yard?
It does, yes.
Okay.
He misses nothing, Ms. Clark. This man
Well, I
misses
just wanted to
nothing.
make sure I get the right.
What are the units selling for? I'm just wondering, if we're talking about the economics of the project, what are the units
They're selling
expected
it.
to sell for?
Approximately in the 400.
Approximately $400,000.
Okay, I didn't understand your comment about 300 then. I thought I heard you couldn't sell something for
if we put in a duplex in there, we'd be talking about trying to get 600 for it.
Why would you sell 2 units at 300 apiece, but you'd sell 6 units at
Cost to
400?
My cost to do the 2 units site work and everything else is gonna be the same as doing the 6 units. And to build a single and trying to get 600 for it, I don't think it would happen.
Mhm.
I don't think I could get 600.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Clark. Is there anybody else who has any questions of Mr. Corcoran or anybody else on his team? And, okay, the record indicates there's no such person present. So let's move on to our third part of this hearing. People in support of this application for variance. Yes, sir, please.
Hi, my name is Jim Wallace. I live at, or I don't live yet, I own 154 Blue Hills Parkway, right here. We're in a butter.
Sure, why don't you sit down and make
Back.
yourself comfortable.
Okay.
154.
We purchased that. We're currently refurbishing it before moving in. But we're in a butter in the back. When we heard about these plans, we had some concerns that have been expressed by others here tonight. However, we engaged in meetings with Mr. Corcoran, Mr. Moxley, and we recognize that this is a terrible eyesore here. This whole property, it's on the back of our property. I mean, we look right out on it. And even now, it sits way above the fence, and you're staring right at it. But when we reviewed their plans and looked at how they were trying to develop it, we felt that it would not only improve their property, but it would also improve and positively impact our property and the neighborhood as a whole. And we did have some concerns, but we met with them, and they listened to us and addressed all of our concerns. We found them very reasonable to work with. And as we look at this whole area, Mr. Corcoran spoke about this block here. And
You're within that block, I
and
noticed.
we're within that block. We think that even with some of the concerns that overall it will significantly enhance the area, and one of our concerns was the deck that was on the back that was going to be 3 feet that would look over into our property. They agreed to make that into a patio, put up a privacy fence, address some of those concerns, and so we feel that this is reasonable given all the factors that have been laid out in quite great detail here. Great. That's it.
Thank you very much for coming. Does any of the board members have any questions? Thank you very much for coming, sir. Is there anybody else present this evening who wishes to speak in support of this application for multiple variances? Okay, the record indicates there's no such person present. Is there anyone present this evening who wishes to speak in opposition to this variance application? Yes, sir. Why don't you come on up here and make yourself comfortable?
Good evening.
Hi.
Ian Kenny, 34 Laurel.
How do you spell your last name, sir?
Kenny.
I'm sorry, I know you pointed to it, but could you?
34.
34 Laurel.
Yeah. I presume you're
Welcome to
familiar
the
with
Board
the
of
parking
Appeals.
lot at the Milton Food Mart?
I'm sorry?
I presume you're familiar with the parking lot. Have you ever noticed how lightly used it is? It's lightly used because it's extremely difficult. This is a very disingenuous map, sir. This street comes out and is 1 car length from that junction. This experiences thousands of cars volume every day. It's extremely difficult to get out of here, especially during the rush hours. I've got a lot of issues with this development, although I prefer to see something happen there. I prefer looking at what you intend to do than what's there now. But we never use it because it's too difficult to get out of that lot.
You never used the what then?
We never used that street to come out of here. 13 years I've lived on Laurel Road. This bump out that was put in to make the road safer What you propose to do will take away from that. It's made actually getting out of here more difficult. It's to slow down the traffic
Sorry,
coming
Mr. Moxley,
around.
let the witness.
I have extreme, concerns about that junction. That's my main issue.
Great.
Okay.
We appreciate you coming
Thank
tonight.
you.
Thank you for your comments. Do you want-
So,
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Kenny, would you come back here? My colleague, Mr. Mullen, has one question for you, maybe two.
So let me just make
Yeah,
sure
sure,
we
sure.
understand. You're saying that it's going to be less safe than they're currently not safe? And
It's
it's going to be exacerbated because there's going to be more people entering and exiting?
correct. Yes, it's very, very lightly used now. When the KFC was in operation, it was a weekend issue.
Yeah.
Much lower volume of traffic. This will not be.
And would you say, so before they put the traffic calming in, was it better?
Better.
This is for you,
There's
Bill.
pluses
Want you
and
to hear this, Bill.
minuses here. I have found that it is actually better for us entering. Cars are much slower entering here.
Yeah,
This is
that
a
makes sense,
particularly
yeah.
difficult junction for us to get out of, made worse by the backed up traffic here. If you use this junction at all, you'll find cars halfway out in this street. In the middle of the rush hour, they just come out.
Yeah, yeah.
How they're going to get to work, I'd like to know.
How are the people
How
who
they're
are
going
going
to
to
get
live
in
in
and
this?
out, yeah.
Okay, okay.
If you could find another way, and I know it's almost impossible, because all these other buildings that are non-conforming, they can get out onto streets out of their own drives much safer than this. Because this road is like that. And all you have, if you have a car's length there, that's it.
Is there any significant difference between the traffic conditions at that intersection at, say, 6 or 7 in the morning as opposed to 5 to 7 at night? Are the conditions the same?
Conditions would be similar at those times. It's the middle of the day where it's...
And where does the traffic back up?
The traffic here, it backs down Thatcher. I doubt if many of the residents of Laurel Road turn right and go down there, because we all come up West Street. It's just much safer to come out and come this way.
Mr. David, do you have any questions of Mr. Kenny?
No, I don't.
Thank you, Mr. Kenny. We appreciate you coming. Is there anybody else who wishes to be heard? Yes, yes, ma'am. Come on up here and make yourself comfortable. Tell us your name and address.
Stasha Haberek, and I live on...
Oh, I'm sorry. You've got to go very, very much slower. What is your name?
Stasha, S-T-A-S-I-A.
Yes, Stasha, yes.
Last name is C-H-A-B-E-R-E-K. And I live at 5 West Street. And
Thank
not to repeat what Ian just said, but in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the early evening hours, West Street is backed up, all the way up, because these cars that are going up there, thank God for the bump, but these cars that are trying to come in here, come out there, they're backed up on Brook Road, they're backed up on Thatcher, and I live on West Street. Wait a second.
It's off the map.
It's off the map, right. I'm in back of the church, and there's cars there. Sometimes I can't even get out of my driveway, and I have a very wide driveway for 6 cars. So this project, the way it is, with the 6 units, it's just going to add to the congestion. Now, it was said before that, well, it's going to be income-producing property, and it's going to be not a 24/7. When the Knights of Columbus was there, the dance hall were held, and other activities, it was only a period of time, for 2 hours, 3 hours. This is going to be 24/7. And who is just going to be staying there? It's going to add to the congestion and to the traffic.
Thank you. Let me just see. Anybody have any questions? No questions. Thank you very much. We appreciate your coming. Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard? Yes, ma'am. You've already introduced yourself, but do it once more, just so.
Oh, I do, okay. Cynthia Clark, 167 Brook Road.
Good. Welcome back, Ms. Clark.
Thank you. And I am speaking for my mother, who owns the house. We've owned the house for 56, 57 years. We're all for development. There were no houses here when we moved in, and, you know, don't remember it. But it was open fields and nicely spaced, single-family houses went in and, you know, it made a neighborhood and it was fine. And development is fine. We've retained the value of the house across the street, the big house, sold for a lot of money, you know, I think it was $750,000 fairly recently. So there are people who are willing to pay reasonable prices for valuable property in the area. I don't know how a nonconformist house got 4 to 6, whatever that is, units. That's strange. That was always a two-family house. But there are two-family houses on both sides of the street, and it's mixed in with, you know, old properties and new properties and newer properties. But this is very different from what we've had any place in the neighborhood. It's a lot of units to a small-ish piece of land, and it doesn't seem reasonable to ask for variances to be able to do that. It is non-conforming, but, you know, so what? Does that mean that more extreme non-conforming things should happen in that place? I can't see that that's okay. The Knights of Columbus, as other people said, was very occasionally used. This has very little parking issue. You don't see cars with no place to park in this area, so I don't understand the comments about taking care of parking issues because there haven't been any. These people don't need extra parking. It's just a garage. And they can fit all the cars that they take in without any problem. There isn't that much. And this is large, I don't know if it's mainly, but there are a lot of people who walk there. It's not all cars. It's not like a supermarket where people drive and carry big bundles. You know, there's a lot of walking from that store. And I didn't realize that they didn't have any parking of their own, but so be it. I do think that the neighborhood is quite densely populated now, and we have zoning policies in place to protect us from overdevelopment. My brother-in-law's a developer, and it's your job to get as much as you can out of a property, and it's your job to protect the community and make sure that it doesn't get overdeveloped. So I would just ask you, it is a gateway to the community. Hopefully it will be developed. We're all for development and improvement, but it just sounds like too much in a small space. It's like having an apartment building go up across the street. That's what it feels like to us. And I did speak with a number of the neighbors. There are a lot of elderly people who aren't able to come to something like this and speak to you. So I don't know, you know, when you say that there have been neighborhood meetings, I know people have been invited, but I think there are a lot of people who aren't represented, they're not representing themselves. I wouldn't assume that it's okay with them because everybody that I spoke with felt the same way. They don't want to look at a parking lot. They're very concerned about traffic. You know, we have a lot of accidents right here. The police come frequently. And I think it's going to be exacerbated by putting in a place that has, you know, if there are 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, it's 12 to 18 cars. It sounds very busy. So.
Thank you, Ms. Clark.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? No questions of Ms. Clark. Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard on this application? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Donahue. I live at 17 Meeting House Lane, and I'm very concerned about the traffic issues and the density issues with the neighborhood. I think it's concern to me that it's very difficult crossing Brook Road, even with a traffic light. I'm concerned about large number of young people living in this area and the traffic issues. And again, there are no easy streets to traverse. even on Thatcher Street, there are speed bumps there now, that the streets are very narrow, and I'd be concerned about the impact on the neighborhood.
Good, thank you very much, Mr. Donahue. Is there anybody else out there who wishes to be heard regarding this application? Okay, the indication is nobody else wishes to speak. Let me ask you, Mr. Corcoran, do you have any additional evidence, or do you want to sum up or respond to some of the neighbors' comments?
I would, I think I'd like to respond briefly to comments and then perhaps sum up. I'm not sure the issue of general impact of parking is a primary consideration with respect to the requirements under the existence of variance, number one. Number two, some of the speakers live in areas that are off the map, that are beyond the 300-foot abutter approach. The letters that were received, the closest of the residents of those is at least a half a mile away. So I understand the difficulty, the perception of impact associated with some additional traffic that's coming. Additional traffic is going to come no matter what that new use of that property might be. If it's an institutional use, there'll be new traffic. If it is an alternative residential use, there'll be new traffic. This developer...
Well, what do you say the traffic conditions out there now are with the present state of the lot being undeveloped? What do you say the traffic conditions are at that intersection? Do you think the neighbors accurately characterize those?
I think they characterize what's existing. I'm
So
suggesting...
what's existing has to get worse, in
What's
your
existing is not
opinion.
going to get worse.
It's not going to get worse.
And-
How is it going to get better?
Well, it'll get better if nothing happens, if there's no development, if a chain gets put across the gate and it's left to rot. That's how traffic would not get worse associated with any development of this property. If you put a single-family residence in there, it's at least 2 new cars, maybe 3. If you put 2, it's 4 to 6, as exists in other properties.
Sure, and if you put a 20-unit 40B in there, it's even going to be worse.
Exactly. And if you put an institutional use, it's going to introduce new traffic. So if you do whatever you can do, whether it's under this approach, which I think is the least impactful development approach to the area, or other approaches, which would be of more significant impact, you're introducing additional new traffic. It's going to exacerbate whatever's there.
Right, but you don't, let me ask you this, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but you have no traffic mitigation plans that you've offered to us for this simple, rather simple development of the property. Do you agree with me that if you...
I do agree. I'm not sure what traffic mitigation plan we could propose here, other than to
Well, you hire a
request the
traffic
town-
engineer, and you see what the traffic flows are, and you see where the intersection lights are, and all I'm trying to suggest to you, just to say, is if an institution was going to develop this property, or was to be sold to an institution, or released, or whatever, wouldn't there have to be a traffic mitigation study performed? And wouldn't have to, if you're making the traffic worse, if we acknowledge that the traffic conditions out there is poor at the present time, and I'll tell you about my experience out there at 3 o'clock 2 afternoons ago in closing remarks, but you're going to have to do some type of substantial mitigation, which is going to further add to the cost of the project, isn't it? By definition, it has to.
Well, it would, if there was a requirement for additional. You know, the condition that's been created with the extension of the driveway through was a condition that was created by the town. Right? So that condition was exacerbated the in and out here. It had nothing to do with what was taking place
I
on the
understand.
property. It's created by the town. In a best-case scenario, if you could secure access to this property, create a secondary access, an egress. Can't be done. Efforts were made to do that.
I understand.
Property can't be acquired. There's no way we can incorporate this into this site plan. So what could you do? Could you pay for a light There's already a stop sign, there are already speed bumps, there's already a traffic light that's been developed by the state. There's already a series of traffic measures that were implemented by a combination of the town and the state over the last 5 to 10 years that supposedly were addressing the concerns of cut-through and other high volumes.
You agree that hasn't worked?
I would agree that yes, and, you know, like Mr. Mullen, I'm a former highway guy.
I know that.
I understand how traffic works, I understand what it is. I understand that, you know, perhaps what was put in there was done with good intentions. I'm not sure it works. But I'm not sure that the fix and the scale of the fix is reasonably leveraged onto this development, whatever that development might be, because it requires actions to be taken by the town and/or the state with respect to modifications of existing improvements
Right,
put in place.
right. And that,
The cost of that is.
the cost is significant, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But it's just for the record's sake, is it clear to say that for this particular project as proposed, the developer does not propose any traffic mitigation?
Yes, we do not propose, I'm not sure what we could propose. I agree, perhaps a traffic count. I think I could recommend that we could evaluate traffic as a result of a completed development. That could be a reasonable condition to be imposed, that we would monitor traffic, and that you would cooperate with the town to the extent that any changes could be implemented by the town. But the town would have to implement those changes, I think. You know, it's town-owned right-of-way, there were town modifications made by the town, it would have to be.
Yeah, can I ask you this, though? If this project as proposed was to go forward, at least in further planning, and you were before the planning board, isn't that where the traffic issues and the traffic mitigation issues would be explored and handled as part of the site plan process?
Yes. Yeah. Issues of lighting, utilities, how those are handled, how the landscape plan is developed, how traffic is evaluated. Those are all within the purview of site plan approval. Those would be necessary considerations to be undertaken.
So let me ask you this, and here's the conundrum I have. If you got your variance tonight, and you could put in your 6 buildings and your 18 units and all of that, that variance runs with the land, doesn't it?
It does.
The variance doesn't run to Mr. Moxley. We think Mr. Moxley's a nice guy, so we give him the variance. He could sell this property 31 days after the variance becomes final.
In fact, it would run to the condominium association.
Right.
Ultimately, that would be created.
Right. And that condominium association could flip this property to somebody on the 31st day after the variance became effective, couldn't it? And they have the perfect right to do that.
Good. Would still require site plan approval
Yes,
from the planning board.
yes.
And without site plan approval, the development couldn't go forward until those issues were addressed. The right to develop, whether it's under the commercial or whether it's multifamily, still requires that second step on behalf of the town. It requires that site plan approval. We're in a conundrum with respect to the timing and the effect of how to go forward with site plan approval, because we don't have the right to be.
But it doesn't make any difference unless you get your variance.
Correct. I can't file unless I have the right.
No, people file every day with the planning board, and they have informal sessions with the planning board to get the planning board's view. It's common practice. It's done by most developers, and most developers have come before this Board of Appeals, in my humble opinion, seeking extraordinary relief, which may be your application here, comes to us with the imprimatur of the planning board that if you give us what they're requesting, we will give the mitigation and the type of site plan necessary to do the development. They don't vote it, but they know, and they come back to us, they get the variance, they go to the planning board, they get site plan review. That's the way it goes
And
down.
I've done that
Many times.
many times, and attempted, in this case, to do it. I've got a conundrum, which is, I've got a use which I think is most reasonable for the property. I've got a timing issue with respect to when and how I can get to approval.
I understand that.
That is either reasonable or not reasonable. I have
Look, can I
no,
ask you this, and I don't mean to be pounding you with questions, but if we ever granted you this variance, and you go back to the planning board, and they don't think that you should be before them, because they think that there should be a rezoning, and the Board of Appeals should have no part and parcel in granting this type of relief, where are you with the planning board? If you've got, even if we give you the relief?
I certainly have the authority to go to the planning board and have them focus on the specific issues around the development of the site. They don't have jurisdiction at that point to vote no to a site plan approval. They have jurisdiction to negotiate hard for the improvements.
And that could make your
associated.
project uneconomic.
It could, and if that happens, there's alternatives that could happen. That's a risk. That's a risk that the town takes, it's a risk that Mr. Moxley takes,
Okay,
okay?
I understand.
It is extraordinary relief. I don't minimize that at all. What I think, and I've spent a lot of time on this project, on the specifics of this project, on the molding of the project, on how to adjust and respond to issues and concerns that have been raised. It is the best plan available for the town, for the abutters, certainly for Mr. Moxley. He took that risk. He's willing to take that risk, and he's willing to say, if he doesn't get the variance, we're on to other things. I think that's a tragedy for the town. I wouldn't be here arguing as strongly as I am if I didn't believe wholeheartedly that this was the right outcome for this property. And I think we meet the requirements under the zoning for the extraordinary relief that's being granted. It is extraordinary. There's a lot to it. The primary relief, obviously, is the use. The use, I would suggest, with respect to the Wareham case, is that was an office use, a commercial use being put into a residential zone. This is a residential use. It's more dense than what's allowed. It's still a residential use.
Well, I think Mr. Dable was saying that the church was a substantial structure that was difficult. I went by this a couple of days ago. You can see through the walls of this building. It looks like it's going to fall over. You want to keep people off this site.
The exterior of the walls are ready to fall off.
Yes, they are.
The
They
bones
are.
of the structure are substantial.
Well, some steel that's in there, some steel
You got
girders.
steel reinforcing at 15 feet the length of the building. You know, running the length, but covering the width. That is a strong structure. Mr. Moxley is a contractor. He understands those issues. It is a building. It is capable of being redeveloped, which is part of why he's asking for the relief that he's asking for. It is not a building that's in danger of falling down. The sides might
It's
blow
not,
off.
it's really, you're not even talking about a building. Aren't you really talking about beams and girders that are in place?
Yes.
That you can hang a structure around
In a basement,
in an existing basement?
all of which are significant in terms of what's there, the cost and the impact to address and remove, to fill, to create, to do something that's allowable within zoning, and then to try and get back the value proposition with respect to what goes there. If you could get the same 400,000 per 2 units, you're still underwater at the end of the day. You're not achieving your cost. It's not an economic development. But I think if you were just thinking about a single-family house or 2 single-family houses on a lot, which would require other relief, first of all, you don't have adequate frontage. You need to come in to consider side yard setback, rear yard setback, how the building's laid out, all of those other impacts with respect to the redevelopment. You couldn't get close to what would be necessary to justify a redevelopment under existing zoning. There's no question that the only way to redevelop this property, whichever way it is not in accordance with residency zoning. You need either a variance or you need some other permit process available to the village. It's a variance, it's an exempt use, or it is a use authorized under state law. Those are the only 3 uses. You know, the Knights went through the process of trying to market the property so that they could sell it. There were no takers for uses that were within allowable zoning. They had to go beyond that to developers who might be willing to take the risk to try and do something different, and that's the outcome. That's where we're at.
Good, thank you. Have you finished? I didn't mean to, we took you on a little divergency there.
I'm happy
but,
I'm happy to answer questions and be diverted as much as the board.
Let me see if we have any questions. I don't think we do. Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions? Mr. David, do you have any questions? Have you finished your presentation?
I have finished my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Presumably, nobody else wishes to be heard, so with all of that, we'll close the hearing and consider the application as we have to in open session. Let me start out with a little preamble, if I may. I really think that Mr. Corcoran's presentation tonight was extraordinary. I think it was very well prepared. He was very focused, very articulate. And I honestly don't know that he could have said any more in support of this particular application than he did. We asked him a lot of questions. I particularly asked him a lot of questions. They weren't easy questions. They were tough questions. And there are no easy answers here. But I think that Ned did a terrific job on behalf of his client, win, lose, or draw, in this particular application. That having been said, I also think that, and I'd like to thank the neighbors for appearing tonight and for participating in this hearing and for sending in letters and other communications to the board. It's very, very important. I've been on this board for too long, perhaps. But I've always been amazed at the professionalism and civility of people who appear at these hearings, even if they intensely disagree with the type of development that somebody is seeking right next to them, whether it's two neighbors disputing about an addition to the home or putting up a fence or whatever it may be, to much more expensive endeavors than we have here. I can't recall a specific instance where anyone has acted in an unfair, an invidious, or uncivilized manner. I think that's a tribute to the town of Milton. I've read newspaper articles, I think you have too, where you find that in some communities, it's like the Democrats and Republicans in Washington, D.C., calling themselves names. And that hasn't happened here. I don't think it happens before the planning board, and I think it's a tribute to everyone. So I want to thank everyone for appearing and presenting your views. I normally do not speak first in these hearings because I tend to ask a lot of questions, and I also tend to like to hear my colleagues' thoughts and feelings on applications like this. And so let me just ask my colleagues, do you want to be heard, Mr. Daber, or do you prefer to defer?
I'll defer.
Okay, Mr. Mullen? Okay, well, everyone wants to defer to me, so I'll pick up the ball. I don't want to be over-legalistic here. I understand realities. I also want to listen to Ted and to Jeff Mullen. One of the great things about appearing on this board is I think we've got some of the most talented lawyers, not only in Milton, but in this area that we can call upon. Jeff Mullen has developed multi-million-dollar projects for the state and for private developers. Ted Daber has developed projects that I have actually been on the other side of, and where he's representing individual developers with developments such as this in significant communities like Cambridge. So I think we've got two absolutely first-class lawyers, honorable members of the board. And so I have to preface my opinions in saying I really want to hear their opinions as well. One thing we do here, maybe to a fault, is we scrupulously abide by the open meeting law. We never discuss these applications on the telephone or via emails or privately. I don't have the slightest idea what either Mr. Mullen or Mr. Daba think about this particular application. So I have to preface my remarks as being provisional and subject to change based upon what I hear. My view of this is that Mr. Corcoran has done the best he can with a very difficult hand of cards to play. The law here is fairly simple, and that is that nobody has a legal right to a variance in Massachusetts. Even if you prove all of the elements under the statute, the board still doesn't have to grant a variance. So ultimately, if you prove all of the factors under the statute, it's an exercise of the sound discretion of this board as to whether to grant the relief. Some of the case law that Mr. Corcoran didn't cite, but I understand why, is that variances are a disfavored form of relief, that it be granted sparingly, that it be granted grudgingly and restrictedly. In situations like the first situation we had, where you have a residence and you have no opposition to the application, the board tends to be somewhat less legalistic. I think that's probably the best way to put it, because many of those variances are small dimensional variances. The last hearing, the gentleman, because of the slope of his lot, the basement was considered the first floor of the building legally, but that's no more the first floor of his building or his house. But legally it was, and so we granted him the relief. There was no opposition to it. If there is opposition to an application, we tend to be a little more strict and a little more conforming to the rule of law, as you would expect us to be. Here, in my view, the opposition is in good faith. You can disagree with what they say. They can disagree with what Mr. Moxley says or what Mr. Corcoran says, but nobody here has expressed any type of invidious opposition to this application for grounds other than good faith grounds that they believe are true. I thought it was kind of interesting here to hear about the traffic issues, because I took a site visit to this property, and I have to tell you, I drove the length of Thatcher Street. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe 3:15. It was on a Wednesday. It took me 3.5 to 4 minutes to get out of Thatcher Street onto, I think it's Brook Road. I could be wrong there. And it was very interesting. I'm stopped at that intersection, and people come whizzing around that corner at 30 or 40 miles an hour. And they just kept coming like it was the Southeast Expressway. And cars were backed up in front of me, and I'm trying to wedge out onto to Brook Road. And by the time those cars had slowed down a little bit, the traffic at the light on Brook Road had backed up to 10 cars, so I couldn't proceed into the intersection and take the left as I wanted to. So I wedged myself out there. I went around the traffic. I took a left-hand turn around, and when I got to the light, there's an island at that intersection that doesn't show on this particular map. And you can only take a right-hand turn. You can't take a left-hand turn. So I had to go up Blue Hill Avenue or whatever that is, a half a mile, come all the way back. And the traffic, and I can't imagine what the traffic conditions out there are at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock at night. And I don't care whether you develop this property into 6 buildings with 3 units, or you try to put 25, 40 B units there. That's a major issue for any type of development of this property. And some of the neighbors in these letters talked about danger to children, danger for traffic accidents occurring out there. I think it's a substantial issue here. And I actually don't traverse this area very often. It's a neck of the town I just don't get to. But I was really surprised. I'm in East Milton Square all the time. And East Milton Square is a breeze as compared to this particular intersection. Maybe it's because of the signalization of East Milton Square, which probably costs tens and maybe $100,000 or $200,000 more than what exists here. But I think that the traffic issue here is a substantial issue. I do understand the difficulty of developing real estate. I don't represent many developers, but I do understand the economic realities of the situation here. In my view, I always thought when I was looking at this application originally that the best way to handle this application would be to refer it back to the planning board, because we've done that in so many instances where the developer is asking the maximum relief possible under the zoning bylaw, and you get involved in issues of traffic counts, mitigation, parking, reasonable access, and I have to tell you, we're more technicians in other things, and that's really kind of a specialty of the planning board. They do this morning, noon, and night, and we generally don't. And so I couldn't understand why the developer was coming to us in the first instance asking for relief, but I think I do now, because the developer has concluded, and a very experienced developer, a very honorable developer from everything I can see, that with what he had to pay for this property and what it takes to remove the asbestos and to fill in the basement and to properly develop the site, the costs are so enormous that he needs 6 units with, he's now saying 2 bedrooms. Well, so be it. I don't really know that that's a big difference. But the cost is so significant. So in those circumstances, I guess going to the planning board is really not a viable alternative under the circumstances. Usually those things work themselves out before the planning board, but if the issue is you need all of the variances you're requesting here, and I'm not concerned about the nitty-gritty variances of sideline setbacks, whether it's 8 feet or 10 feet or 12 feet or anything like that. I'm concerned about the development of this site with the variances that are required. This is a 2-family zone at that max, and rather than asking for 3 or 4 units that you may have some discretion on, you're asking for an enormous amount of relief. And Ned acknowledged that. It's significant relief. Mr. Corcoran believes that it's in the real world of development, and Ned represents developers of great stature and enormous significance, that this is the only thing that will fly under this particular development, and he needs the relief, otherwise it's not economically capable of being developed, and he may be 100% right there. But my view of this is that we're the Board of Appeals. We're not the town meeting. We're not the uni-legislator of anything else here. That we grant variances. Sometimes we grant substantial variances. But here they're asking for 3 times the relief that the zoning allows, with a whole lot of variances attached to it, in a situation that hasn't undergone site planning, which is one of the advantages of going to the planning board, at least on a preliminary basis. Usually the planning board signals to us that this is a site that will accommodate this number of units or this type of relief, and if you're willing to grant them the relief, we'll give them the site plan. That's not the case here. So granting this variance, even if we elected to do it, is going to go back to a planning board that thinks that this relief should not be granted. The statute should be amended, and who knows what's going to happen on the site plan review. And Mr. Corcoran doesn't want to do that. The developer doesn't want to do it. I can't force them to do it. They may be right in not doing it. That's a business call that you've got to make, Mr. Moxley. It's not my call. But my call here is at least chairman of the Board of Appeals, is to suggest that we can't unilaterally write the bylaw because this project is too expensive for you to do without going to 40B or going to some type of institutional development. I don't think that's our function. I think, to be frank, why many times I don't fully agree with the planning board on some issues. This is an issue I do agree with them. I think this is something that if there's to be relief, it should be relief by elected officials of this town. We're not elected officials. We're attorneys. We're appointed by the town moderator because of our technical experience. If you don't like our decisions, you can't go to the polls and vote us out of office. If you don't like the planning board, you can vote them out of office. Some people have tried to do that. Here, you can't do it. You've got to go to the town moderator and say, these people don't know what they're doing. They're rewriting the zoning bylaw. And people are entitled to do that. But we're appointed and we're not elected officials. And I think if there's going to be this type of substantial deviation from the bylaw, it certainly should come from the elected officials. And I understand that's not practical. I understand Mr. Corcoran's argument. I don't disagree with it. I understand Mr. Moxley's position. He doesn't want to hold this property for 18 months. But I didn't buy the property. You bought the property. You know more about developing real estate than I do. I admit that. So I think that my view of this, subject to talking to listening to my friends here and respected colleagues, is that this type of relief, while it may have a siren song ability to say, well, Jesus, you should do this to avoid a 40B, okay? And nobody wants 40Bs. We've all got to be afraid of 40Bs. Well, we haven't had a 40B in this town, and I know they're technical and they're expensive, and Mr. Moxley may be before us with a 40B, but he bought the property. You can go 40B, you can sell it to a church, you can do anything you want. This is America, it's your property, and you can develop it as you will. But we're the Board of Appeals here, and I don't think we should be making political decisions here that are contrary to, that are substantially contrary to what we've been told to do by town meeting in this zoning bylaw, particularly with the type of opposition that's here. So my view of this is, since the developer has told us that it's grant the relief requested, or we're going to go elsewhere. My view is to tell the developer to go elsewhere with best wishes for good health and hope you can make a profit on this project. But I don't want to be in a position of having voted for this project and have the town moderator, the planning board, and/or town meeting member say, who do you people think you are? You're rewriting the bylaw because of the exigencies of the situation when you didn't have to do it, and it's clear that we don't have to do it, and I'm not inclined to do it. Mr. Mullen, please. I'm sorry to have taken so much time.
It's just such a hard act to follow, John. This is a really interesting case, and I've been on this board a long time. I can't remember a case like this.
I can't either. Let me be
Yeah.
frank. I can't either.
And it's extraordinary in a couple of ways. Let me first say I appreciate Ned's presentation, the neighbors' interest, and the fact that they came out and they spoke and they let us know what their thoughts were, because I think that's really an important part of our job as members of the board. I think something is better than nothing here. I think the site is an embarrassment for everybody, and it's unfortunate what's happened there. But I don't think this is it. And I'll say three things for that. The first is, and some of this is repetitive, but I just for the record, there's a lot of relief here. Even in a town where we routinely give relief to neighbors, to owners who seek it, it's usually, as John indicated, unopposed, and it's in the nature of improving properties, similarly to the way that they've generally been improved in the neighborhood. And while this is an improvement, it's really an extraordinary improvement for Milton because it's a 6-unit building. And as I said, I've been on the board a long time, 15 or so years. I can't remember another 6-unit property that we've had. And I don't think there are that. I mean, Bill Clark's here in the audience, and I don't know how many there are, but there aren't that many in this town. So I really think that gives it a little bit of a special flavor. The second is some of the relief that's requested is being exacerbated by the expansion of the existing structure. And I think that's a really big deal. And I wonder about, I understand that I'm really interested in this steel-framed property and the fact that it's historic, and I think that's important and important in a town like Milton. But I think you may, I really would encourage somebody to rethink that. I wonder about, the whole historical nature of it, if it's going to be expanded in such a significant way. I mean, maybe that's none of my business as a member of the Board of Appeals, but it is insofar as it goes to the type of relief that's being sought. It seems like on all sides of the property. And the third is, there really hasn't been enough discussion about the use, which is really, I think, what's driving this conversation. And I agree with John that we're not really well equipped as a board to give a good hard look at the site plan. And I really think that's the fact that you look at the bylaw and you realize that anything other than a single family, well, any multifamily needs to go through site plan review, and I don't think we can substitute our judgment for the planning boards on that issue. And at the end of the day, that really does drive it, particularly with respect to such an intense use of the land. So for those three reasons, I don't think I can. I will say I won't support the application, despite the fact that I agree with what John said about the presentation and the arguments that were made. It was well done, but it doesn't pass muster, I think, with what our requirements are under the bylaw.
Mr. Deva, please.
I agree with both Mr. Leonard and Mr. Mullen in terms of the excellent presentation that was made and the fact that Ned indicated, and I believe he believes, that this could be the best use of the property, but unfortunately that's not what we're here to decide. That's not the standard, and we can't substitute our judgment for the framers of the zoning ordinance, or, as John indicated, act as a legislative body. And for that reason, and the difficult standard that John alluded to, that variances are granted sparingly in the opposition, and without repeating everything that John and Jeff said, my inclination too would be to vote against.
Okay. So all those in favor of granting the relief, all those in favor of denying this application for variance?
Yes.
Yes.
Denying.
Thank you very much for your time, Ned. You did a great job. And Mr. Moxley, best wishes to you. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're going to be adjourned.